Huh?
Afzali.
Afzali.
But it was
Well,
good.
you know, an F and a Z,
It's
Z and an F.
Just
That's the way I
calculate,
always
that's all
wrote
you
it.
need to know. I'll be at the top of your ballot if you're a Republican. Just stop at the top and move on to the next one. We're talking about regulations. And frankly, I disagree with some of the other candidates up here. I believe the banking crisis and the collapse of the real estate market was not because of not enough regulation. It was because of too much regulation. I will admit to you that I'm a free market capitalist. Don't hate me, I'm a very nice person. I think that the Community Reinvestment Act, which forced banks to make loans to people who were not credit worthy, that forced banks to go into neighborhoods that were targeted by some kind of social plan that the government arbitrarily sets, that government has to make certain to force private businesses to do things that they would not do because they have enough sense to know that those people were not credit worthy for those. I'm also in the real estate market, by the way. I didn't mention that at the beginning. So I'm on the front lines of what's happening. And until this real estate market turns around, we will not see a recovery. And that real estate market was caused by government regulation. Make no doubt about that. Now, we have other serious regulations that I think need to be repealed. There's something called the Davis-Bacon Act that probably sounds like foreign language to you. But this is a bill that costs the taxpayers probably 30 to 40% more on government projects. It forces companies to pay a certain wage, and it forces companies to seek minority or to seek a woman who may not even be near to the project, go across state lines, who can charge 50% more for a project, all because of government regulation. We do not have too little government regulation. We have too much. CaptainForCommerce.com. Vote green.
Sorry, Kathy, I obviously have a dyslexic problem that I was unaware of.
No worries.
David Brinkley.
Good evening. Thank you. First off, a lot of the regulations we have are reactionary. And they're reactionary to something either no one anticipated or something else obviously came along the line. Do we have many regulations now dealing with buggies and whips and things like that? No, not really. But yeah, something can come up. For instance, we're dealing with a regulation now dealing with landmen. Landmen are the people who go out and lease property for oil and gas drilling in Maryland. We don't regulate it. But it's very important now that we're dealing with Marcellus Shale and some of the issues that come about with that. The second thing is a lot of the regulations are done, some people say for protection of the public, but they're also done for the protection to create either oligopolies or monopolies. And to that regard, they're very problematic. Why? Because they keep some people from getting into the sector, and we don't have as many choices as consumers for some of those individuals. Another example where we have a problem is the Keystone Pipeline. We need energy. There's a resource to be able to bring it in to this country so we can utilize it. But we're being told that the regulations are saying it's a problem. Well, guess what? It's going to be delivered. I would rather have it delivered under our regulations, under our environmental guidelines, and have it processed in Texas than have Canada ship it across the Rocky Mountains, ship it out from to the Pacific Ocean so it goes to China, and then should their guidelines fail, we have the problem on our shores. Rob mentioned the issue with Gulf drilling. Maybe we would have been better if we had better regulations. Well, guess what? You get too tight, we need to learn from it, but if it gets too tight, then the Chinese end up drilling down there in some other type of leases, and it gets shipped somewhere else, and we have no oversight. The answer is, there is a balance that can be struck. The other answer is, go to a website, mbrg.org, Maryland Business for Responsive Government. They rate people who have voting records in Annapolis on their business voting records. And they also rate the top Republican and the top Democrat. Obviously, I do very well. I encourage you to look at that side. Thank you.
Charles Bailey. I think I would echo what mostly has been said up to now. It's a balance, and it depends on the context. I've been encouraged by President Obama's program of opting out of the No Child Left Behind Act, as Asfali mentioned before. This is a program where the federal government provides the basic requirements, below which we cannot go. And if the states come up with their own answers, then they opt out. 10 states just opted out about a month ago, and I think Maryland's on the next list to be considered for that. That's a smart way of returning the power back to the states, and the federal government's regulation is more based, the floor below which you cannot go. And I think that's a very smart way of doing things, and I'm encouraged by the president's policy on that. Thank you. And Brandon Rupio.
It's tough to say something original when you get here to the end. Look, regulation is rule setting, oversight is quality enforcement. I think any rational person would say we need some of that. That goes without saying. But I think we have gone too far, and I think a number of people have mentioned that. Whether it's the EPA, Sarbanes, Oxley, Dodd-Frank, or all the czars running around who are unelected, imposing their will on the economy, we have gone too far. I think the larger issue here is government involvement in the economy. I believe in free market principles. I believe in supply and demand competition. I believe the consumer knows what is best for them and their families. I think that when we talk about regulation, we also get into the things that I spoke about earlier about the principles of economics. This is why it's difficult to do business here in America now. That, along with our tax code, which is burdensome. So getting the government out of the economy, I think, is important. Look at 3 segments of our economy. Runaway health care costs, housing and mortgage crisis, and the record levels of student loan debt that our youngest working Americans currently have today. What do those 3 segments of the economy all have in common? Massive federal government intervention. When the federal government prints money and pumps it into these sectors of the economy, one and only one thing happens: runaway prices. The government involved in the economy is the problem, it is not the solution. Thank you.
Well, Brandon, you get to
Back
be,
to back. All right, I'll
you
try
get
to
to
say
be,
something.
you get to be totally original here. And I warned the candidates, this question was either written by an attorney or by a linguist going for his doctoral thesis. So pay attention here, Brandon. Here's the question. With regard to energy and environmental issues, would you prioritize the environment or expeditiously develop the energy we need utilizing current technologies?
Well, I would say this is another one of my criticisms that I have of the incumbent congressman, is absolute obsession with using taxpayer dollars and subsidies to fund an artificial green economy. It has been done before. It is called Spain, and it does not work. There is more petroleum available here in North America now than any other time in history. We need to significantly increase our petroleum production. That will do 2 things. It will increase our domestic economy. It's good for job creation, and it will also strengthen our national security. Look, we are currently funding both sides of this war on terror right now. We spend all of this money on defense, and with Brent crude at 125 and West Texas Intermediate at 105, we are giving our enemies all of the money they need to fund their terrorist operations. This is where Iran is getting the money to fund its nuclear operations. It's from the price of petroleum. Petroleum is a commodity, and a basic fundamental principle of economics says if you want to reduce the price of a commodity, you have to increase the supply. I support more domestic petroleum production here in the United States. I think we can also have, I think part of the question was about protecting the environment. Look, if you use best business practices and the latest technology, we can do that. And I know that from the private sector. Thank you.
Charles Bailey. Now, I disagree with my neighbor. I think that it's wrong to be continuing down the line of fossil fuels. Put the priority on the environment and expeditiously develop new technologies, greener technologies that balance until we can get off fossil fuels altogether. That's the best way to be independent of foreign companies or countries that would do us harm. Thank you. Major Brinkley.
I had the honor this year to serve on a task force. Don't laugh, I'm not going to put it on my resume. Septic task force. Now, you know, the governor proposed banning septic tanks, and I did not want to be on this thing. And it was a really bad idea that he came came up with, and then I get stuck on it for a lot of 22-to-1 votes, 22-to-1, 22-to-1. Why? Because it was the wrong idea. And I made a joke. I made a joke while I was in there that, you know, there seems to be a lot of people worshiping at the Green Cross. And one of the people from the Department of Environment said, Senator, we call it faith-based science. And therefore, we have to make a lot of these policy decisions. But we're also seeing the impact of that at the national level. Now, I'm going to make a real strange leap to tax policy. We need to lower some of the tax costs on getting offshore money or into this country so it can be reinvested. Why is it offshore? A lot of it's because of our environmental programs and policies that do not exist over there. So Apple, anyone having an iPhone, an iPad, how many people do they employ here? How many hundreds of thousands do they employ there? And they don't pay the wages. They don't have the environmental oversight. We are all connected by that. There's a balance that can be struck. I just bought a diesel automobile. Now guess what? It took them a few years, but there are only German-made diesel automobiles in this country. But 50% of the world, or 50% of the cars overseas are diesel. And they're very clean. They can be clean. We have the technology. We have to ensure that people can afford to utilize them. And in that context, there is a balance to be struck here too. But we can't do so at the expense and ignore what's going on in the rest of the world. And the congressman has to pay attention to that and strike that balance for Montgomery County, for Frederick County,